I'm so grateful for the reminder of that beautiful song, Don't Be Afraid or Be Not Afraid. It brought me back to a few years ago when I was interviewing for this post as pastor. We were still in Ireland, and the search team was virtually with us in the room. Who would have thought? A sign of what's to come. But what they did after we were going through that real hard period of discernment, do we leave our country and leave jobs that we loved? That was the song that we heard the search team sing over us, and it was so reassuring at the time. I know, Margaret, you'll remember that. She was part of the search team, but those moments were so precious. And the irony is, here I am in COS, and so many of you are watching virtually now, but those words are true. Don't be afraid. My love is stronger than your fear. But let's turn to Daniel 3, this amazing story of the fiery furnace. And I want to say that there's a Nebuchadnezzar in all of us. I know what you're probably thinking. Let's just dismiss this Nebuchadnezzar figure, this parody, who epitomizes all the worst leaders that we've ever known, and get straight to what those three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are doing. But I think it's important to pause and think about Nebuchadnezzar because he dominates so much of this narrative. Our tendency is to go straight to the fire so that we can say God's with us in the fire. But I confess that jumping into a fire is hard. Being willing to jump into a fire and not actually knowing if God is going to save or not, that is real costly faith. And it's not a place I often live my comfortable Christian life. So we need to go through the Nebuchadnezzar before we get to the fire. Because I think this story carries a health warning of what we can become if we pay attention to that little Nebuchadnezzar in all of us, and how we need to make room for God again in our lives to save us. Nebuchadnezzar, can you visualize that statue? What a statue that's 9 feet wide and 90 feet tall. Can you visualize the dimensions of that? I did a quick Google, and if you take the Leaning Tower of Pisa and half the dimensions, half the height and half the width, that's what the statue approximately would be like. And as you can tell from the tower, it's unstable. It's a very weak dimension. And it signals the deformed understanding of the king and what he was trying to do, his deformed self-understanding. Just before in chapter 2, Daniel had interpreted the king's dream about statues, and the meaning was that all these statues one day are going to fall. The kingdom that you've built, Nebuchadnezzar, is going to fall. And yet in the next chapter, what does Nebuchadnezzar do? He builds the statue. He goes right on ahead. Rather than pay heed, he projects an image out of his own frenetic insecurities. He's determined this will be the golden age of my rule. And we do that too, don't we? We project out the image that we want people to see on social media, the good times, the picture of the family that's always smiling. Except like any Facebook picture of a family on vacation having a perfect time, you don't see the real story behind it, do you? You don't see the frustrations of what it takes to get that picture of everyone lined up smiling. And that's the mocking irony of this statue, this deformed statue. We know the dimensions of the statue. We know the place of the statue. We know what the statue is made of, that it's gold. We don't know actually what the statue is. Who is the statue? Is it Nebuchadnezzar? Is it one of the gods that they worship in Babylon? That's the irony. We don't actually know in this story. What is the statue? That's the irony, the mocking irony. There's a hole in the center of the story. But maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the fear of being truly known for who we are. Better to construct this charade around your life, busyness, because if people see us for who we really are, they mightn't like us. The words that you say that you know hurt others. The thoughts that you think that would wound even your closest friends. There's a Nebuchadnezzar in all of us. It's good to have children to bring you down to size, especially teenage children. A couple of weeks ago, we decided we would embrace this winter of Michigan, and we went out skiing in Canonsburg. It had been a while since we were there, and I remember standing with our eldest, and we were looking at the chairlifts and how high they went up. And I said to Ian, "You wouldn't want to drop anything from those chairlifts." Famous last words. And I said to Ian, "Do you have zips in your coat pockets?" And he said no, so I took out everything he had in his pockets, put them all in my pockets, zipped them up, and off we went on the chairlift. As we were going up, the scenery is so beautiful, and you're rising up to the heights. And I said to Ian, "Let's take a selfie." Unzipped the pocket, took out the phone, fumbled, heard it drop, and I knew what had happened, but I couldn't look down. And all I could hear from the chairlift behind was, "You've dropped your phone." Fortunately, I have a very resourceful eldest son, and he was counting the number of poles so that we could track all the way back down, and we recovered the phone. But doesn't it sum it up? You want to take a selfie of your finest moments, and we just couldn't get there. The coat stayed zipped for the rest of the ski journey. But there's a Nebuchadnezzar in all of us. And all the while you see this narrative around Nebuchadnezzar swelling up and growing. Did you hear what Jonathan read about those musical instruments? How it went on and on and on. The horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the drum, the entire musical ensemble. And that's repeated over and over again. Endless, tedious repetition to show the charade of it all. And then there's this network, the potential political network of alliances, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, the province officials. But as this language stays in the public domain, it begins to morph, it begins to change. Because by the time you get to the dedication, what once was listed as this tight affinity group of all these political officials now becomes peoples, nations, languages. Do you see the maneuver? These affinity groups becomes a worshipping community of difference. Rather than focusing on what they all have in common, it becomes people from every tribe, tongue, language, nation. Because that's what we all want, isn't it? To be part of something bigger, inclusive, welcoming, diverse. And all the while the music is playing, the trigon, the lyre, the harp, the drums. But the language becomes engorged, and now it says all peoples, all nations, men of every language. And what's becoming here is it's turning into wholesale compliance. There's a Nebuchadnezzar in all of us. We want diversity, but only through subjugation. There's a Nebuchadnezzar in all of us that enjoys compliance, because life is easier when everybody gets on swimmingly. Gordon Mersel wrote a book called Praying in Exile, and he talks about the importance of recovering prayers of lament when we're in exile, because he says the alternative is compliance. He says, when a child believes rightly or wrongly that their parents' love for them is non-existent or maybe conditional, it turns into compliance, where a child only does what they think their parents are going to approve of. And compliance carries with it this futility that their life doesn't matter. Their inner worth, their significance doesn't matter. And they're dying on the inside, but complying on the outside. And it's chilling when you enlarge this idea and think about the Holocaust. I read Victoria Barnett's book, Bystanders, this month about the Holocaust and the many Germans who were rational, good citizens. But they latched on to this idea of traditional family values that Hitler constructed, but absolutized, and then they complied. Many of us have been involved in listening circles over the past month, reading over Synod's report. And I've been thinking about how any institution can set up ideals and absolutize them. Marriage, singleness. But we set the bar so high that it creates deep wounds in all of us if we don't live right up to this ideal, and the deep pain and shame that we all carry when we're less than these high, high ideals. Compliance. Nebuchadnezzar, he created this ideal people of languages, people, nations, worshipping, but he absolutized it. And the alternative to this way of compliance is lament. When you're staying close enough to your Creator God, your covenant God, the God who loves you, that you've confidence to cry out boldly, where you've confidence to question freely, when you're able to doubt and then find your way again. The freedom to fail and know you're still going to be loved by God. You're still going to be valued even when your life is a mess. There's a little Nebuchadnezzar in all of us that enjoys compliance. There's a little Nebuchadnezzar in all of us that makes us so brittle that if anybody challenges us, we take it personally. Our anger soars and we want to throw people into the fire. It may sound extreme, but I think we're all so weary in this pandemic when there's so much inconsistency in the wider ethical codes of how to live and keep communities safe. It's easy to despair. It's easy to give in to sanguine compliance. It's easy to find ourselves overreacting. It's easy to take things personally. That's me. It's sometimes easier to do all that work than to ask this hard question: am I so loved that if I step into the fire with God, will God save me? That's a hard question to get to. There's a Nebuchadnezzar in all of us, but there's another way. Because in contrast to this growing public facade of Nebuchadnezzar, there's these three men who refuse to defend themselves. In contrast to the tight power and control and authority of Nebuchadnezzar, there's these three men who simply acknowledge there's a higher throne, and they leave room for God to work. Whether God saves or not, God can decide. It's that simple. Simple uncomplicated faith. We will honor God because of who God is, not conditional on our lives. God is God. And by relinquishing all their desires, God meets them in the fire. As they throw themselves on the fiery holocaust, they fulfill what we say here at every funeral at COS, Romans 14, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. I know there's still a part of me that worships God because I think I might have a better life because of it. And it's hard to let go of that, isn't it? But there's a greater love here, a God who meets us in the trial. Not taking us out of the trial, but in the trial. A God who could have showed up days before from the clouds and knocked that statue down. A God who could have showed up before the three men got into the furnace, but didn't. Instead, God shows up in the furnace, in the fire. God meets them in the place of suffering because that's the God we serve, a God who comes down and meets us in your and my hell where we need him most. God could have saved Jesus from the fire. God could have sent the angels to the cross. God could have given Jesus eloquent words to say when he was on trial. But Jesus didn't defend himself. Instead, he chose God's way of saving not just him, but the world. A love that goes down to the depths and brings resurrection so that we can say in these things, we're more than conquerors through him who loved us. I was listening to a podcast recently about the life and faith of Vincent van Gogh, someone who nearly made it to priesthood but didn't. He took an internship in a mining village, and after 6 months, when the diocese came to hear him preach, they couldn't actually pick him out because he had so identified with the miners. He looked like them. And so he never made it to the priesthood. And I never noticed it before until it was pointed out in this podcast, but when you look at Starry Night, that beautiful painting, there's a church there and there's other houses. And over the countryside, the church with the steeple, the lights are out. But in those homes, the light, the fire is lit. And I'm sure some of you know the many theories on why this might be true, maybe disillusionment about institution. Who knows? But I wonder today if we could imagine that the fire of God's presence is in the homes of the faithful, in the homes of those who are watching on Zoom today, dispersed, not gathered in one building. Normally, it's what goes into the furnace that experiences transformation from soft clay to this impervious, impermeable vessel. But here, it's not the three men in the fire who change. Their character is the same all the way through. But it's the people outside who transform. It's Nebuchadnezzar who notices God in the fire. And his own tight political system, it's broken open. Now he makes room for God and his empire to be worshipped. And God is so unconcerned about ego that God never speaks in the story but lets the testimony of the enemy set the tone. And so today, I wonder, instead of nurturing that little Nebuchadnezzar deep in your soul that easily overacts, that easily takes things personally, that's worried about image, that fears inner worth and inner value, what if instead, like Van Gogh, we look for the fire in the homes of people, the faithfulness of God being seen, and maybe that will bring transformation. I want to close with a story from a place where this image of the three men and God in the furnace is so prevalent. The Nubian region of East Africa, Ethiopia, Sudan, where there's been tremendous suffering over the years, and yet that image you'll see on the doorway of many churches. Mark Nichol was an Anglican priest, and he went to southern Sudan to teach at Bishop Gwynn Theological College during the time of the 1980s when the Civil War was rumbling and just about to break out. And I was reading his letters from southern Sudan. Listen to what he describes about the angels. This is June 19, 1987. Those centuries old Ethiopian angels fascinate me with their large, serious eyes, their brilliant, spiky wings. Are they children's toys or messengers from God? What do they see, those angels? I look at the chaos of church. I feel the tribal prejudice bristle among students as rebel recruitment advances and near neighbors are killed. The question echoes, where is God? What messages do those cherubs take of what they see? For all the wings, heaven seems all too quiet. Holy Week found the cherubs hovering close as we held a tenebrae service, extinguishing candles one by one. How thoroughly did the darkness and silence witness what was to come, we could not know. On Holy Saturday, we learned of our neighboring town. A landmine blew up a truck, killing 18. Where are the angels? There are simpler, soothing times of birthday parties, gathering around the fire, fresh bread, singing in 4 languages. Are God's angels silent, or do they gather around protectively around our bonfire? For there's another picture, an ancient picture that speaks to my soul. A radiant mural in Khartoum Museum bearing witness to the faith of our Nubian Christians for thousands of years. In the center of a burnt red background surrounded by spikes of flame stands a radiant white and gold angel, wings stretched. And under those peacock feathered wings stands 3 men, hands upheld in worship. 4 men walking round in the fire unbound. There are no cherubs. No, here is the angel, the Christ figure, in the very heart of the flames carrying the cross-crowned scepter. Our belief with the ancient Nubians is God enters the flame with us, who takes upon himself the full force of the landmine, the tragedy of meaningless death, the alienation of brother from brother. He is the God who enters the heart of the furnace and perseveres amid fear, who will not depart, will not leave until this evil is redeemed, until this brokenness is healed. Was it all my hours before Ethiopian icons or my own spiritual need that got us painting our own version of the fiery furnace in the college chapel? It took many hours daubing away with enamel paint, covering a wall and 2 doors. What a peculiar waste of time decorating when evacuation is imminent. But this is the image of God in the fire that sustains us here. This God enters in the flames, in the fear. And that picture is my prayer. The next entry that Mark makes in his diary is of him being carried out brutally in the middle of the night by the rebels in his pajamas. He's taken hostage. He marches for 2 months with the rebels until he is set free. That's living in the fire, isn't it? We've never been through that here. And in a minute, we're going to come to this table and we're going to witness and bear witness to the one who stood in the fire so that we can know love no matter what, unconditional love. So where do you want to be today? Do you want to stick with Nebuchadnezzar, exhausted, driven by fear, dreaming up the next projection of your image to others? Or do you want to be in the small fire with God and leave your story up to God? The three men stood and worshipped. So simple and yet so hard, isn't it? If you're tired and weary, burned out by religion, the invitation today is to simply come to the table and place your life on the fire. Romans 12 says, take your everyday, ordinary life. You're eating, you're sleeping, you're eating, you're going to work, you're walking around. Place it before God as the fire offering. Because embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.